What's up? What's up? Getting all dialed in. Make sure all the things plugged in. What's up, Jerry? Good morning. Oh man, who made the text so small? And the restream. Huh. There we go, there we go. Alright, let's get warmed up here. Got the fans going. Get everything happening. Music going. Looking good. I remember I wanted to ask who made it small. Yeah, I don't know. I just put it back to 150. Maybe it got reset? I don't know. Not quite sure. I was listening to this really interesting, Andy and myself, yeah. I was listening to this really interesting video from who's this? Dylan Johnson. He's a Training Peaks coach, located in Sneaky Faster, going over the science. How funny! Eye doctor? No, not me, my friend, not me. Let's get this shared out. I did have some good videos to show you. I probably have time to run it. Yeah. Not me, not me. Not as easy to share as before, huh? Click of a button from before. Not as much. Kind of a double click. And you can't go, does it go back? Yeah, I have to click it every single time for all the shares. Hey, Bob. Sprinting with a disc wheel. Heck yeah! Hey, Tervali. What's up? Now I know who you are. What's going on, Katie? Midday midday sprints. So, we'll get this party going. Learn a little bit. Chat a bit. Yeah. Yeah, you are. Deep dive, Jerry. Deep dive. That's what we call that. Hey, Nick. What's going on? Thanks for joining in, everybody on Twitch. A very rare midday workout for me. Some changes in the schedule at the end of the year here have allowed me a little bit of extra time off, so I'm very happy about that. Grateful. Nice chocolate cake. Chocolate cake. Hey, Andy, what's up? Too early to talk about. Look at the early. Too early to talk about chocolate cake. Too early. Too early. Just getting this shared out on Facebook. Yeah. Jerry, watch out. Shaking like crazy. Just did tour to New York and got wrecked. Nice. Absolutely, Terrell. Yeah, definitely worth it. Earn that. Thanks for joining in, everybody. I know everybody's rolling in on Facebook right now. Yeah, it's never too early to. I don't know, man. At the time you guys work out, that's pretty early to start talking about it. All right, numbers rolling, looking good. You're welcome. All right, so let's see. We got a couple minutes here. We got a couple sprints. Let's throw in the first video. I wanted to talk, or at least break some of this down, refresh my memory as I make new training plans for our riders in the Endurance Lab. Hopefully everyone will find this interesting here. Let me pull it up right now. I'm gonna pause this. Fix the threshold here.
Hey, and welcome to today's episode.
Oh, that is
talking about
quiet.
the physiological origin of FTP, or functional threshold power. let's get straight into it. So I assume that most of you will know the term FTP or actually use it in training, test it, use the results to derive training zones. And I assume that most of you will train and try to improve your power output or running speed or whatever measure of intensity at functional threshold power. So most people know or have kind of an idea of what FTP is, right? But what's about the question not what it is, but how it's actually generated? What determines the power output at FTP? And why does one athlete have a power output of, let's say, 200 watts, and another athlete has a power output of 300 or even 400 watts? What is the difference? What are the mechanics that determine power output at FTP? And that's what we're going to look at in this video. And in order to do so, what we want to start with is understand where the term FTP is actually coming from, or functional threshold power.
There we go.
I think it's important to understand, no matter what definition you might be using, 60-minute power output or whatsoever, we come to this later, is that your functional threshold power, is kind of the functional substitute, or the more applicable, more training applicable substitute for a term called anaerobic threshold. And anaerobic threshold has been out there in the world of exercise physiology for decades. Actually, it's a much older term than threshold power. And in most cases, anaerobic threshold will be determined by lactate profile tests. You would have to visit a lab or a field test.
Right? Yeah.
You basically increase, that is kind of the traditional protocol. You basically increase exercise intensity, stepwise.
Drop down
3
questions.
Minutes, 5 minute, 8-minute steps.
We could
measure the lactate concentration.
Chat more about it.
And then use whatever kind of method to derive calculate the power output or running speed at anaerobic threshold. So what FTP actually is or is trying to do is, without the need to go to a lab, try to determine this domain of intensity which relates or correlates or is actually your anaerobic threshold power. And because it is not the real physiologically correct scientific way to determine an anaerobic threshold, it is called functional threshold power, because it is the functional value of this threshold you're looking for. Okay? But the real origin, so where it all comes from, is a term called MLSS.
A lot of people use these interchangeably.
Maximum lactate steady state.
A lot of that
Right?
misconception comes here.
Back in the mid 70s of the last century, 1976, the first publications came out describing that at a certain exercise intensity, the lactate concentration would be stable. So if you look at time, minutes, most likely in most cases, and the lactate concentration, at a certain intensity, the lactate concentration in the blood, measured in the earlobe or in this time actually at the finger, would stabilize.
There
And
it
when
is.
you increase the intensity, the lactate concentration might still stabilize, but on a higher level. And at a certain intensity, lactate values would not stabilize anymore, but kind of increase. And then the maximum lactate steady state actually basically refers to the highest intensity, the highest power output or running speed, at which it is still possible to maintain a constant lactate concentration. Okay? And again, this is then what anaerobic threshold or FTP are trying to do via a lactate profile test or via whatever kind of test using, power data these days from your bike.
Thanks for the like.
Or run.
Appreciate that.
And what might be interesting to know is that the differences, so the jumps in intensity from this lactate curve to this one, normally you're looking at changes of approximately 10 watts. Okay? In some cases, maybe 7. So that's an important side note, because it basically tells you that even with this gold standard, So this MLSS is the
10
gold
watt
standard
difference.
to
That's
determine
throughout a week,
the
day to
real
day.
threshold, so to speak.
Yeah.
The resolution is never better than
Better
approximately
than 7 to
or
10
10
watts.
maybe
That's
depending
how far
on
off
the
you could
body
be in a
weight.
day.
Okay, so even with this gold standard, it is not valid, it is not correct, so to speak, to even discuss changes in power output at threshold smaller than this. And then obviously this is also true for any approximation of this metabolic
Even
state.
more.
Okay?
Even more.
So, long story short, what we're looking at here with talking about functional threshold power is trying to be an approximation of an intensity domain where lactate still stabilizes. Okay, and why lactate? Well, view lactate as a marker, as an indicator for fatigue. Not saying that it causes fatigue, right? But you know, at exhaustion, an athlete reaches a certain lactate level. And the steeper this curve, right, the sooner the athlete will reach his individual maximum possible lactate concentration. Basically saying intensity is higher, fatigue occurs sooner. Now, obviously, this gold standard maybe is nice in terms of accuracy and scientific reliability and so on and so forth, but it's most likely,
Yeah, exactly, Jerry.
in most cases,
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
you would use durations of 30 minutes. So whatever, 30 minutes 280 watts, 30 minutes 290,
It can be.
30 minutes 300. You can do a maximum 2 of those on one day, so you can already see it's not very practical, right? It's not really applicable to training. You have to go to a lab and you would have to go several days. And obviously you need to know where to look, right? Do I start here with 280 watts or 380 or 180? So not really applicable, not really useful for application in training. Therefore, lactate incremental lactate profile test, determine anaerobic threshold, or the more training applicable way, forget about the scientific one, use the functional threshold power. Maybe good enough? And actually very good usable. So this is where the term
usable.
FTP comes from. It is actually linked to being able to sustain a certain lactate concentration. The highest intensity which can be sustained without accumulating lactate. This is, historically speaking, what FDP is trying to approximate here.
Oh. All right, got a couple warm-ups here. I'll throw in another video here in just a bit. Get a warm-up spins. Grab a gear. The music rolling. Yeah, absolutely. So then the question is how do we determine it, right? We've talked about a couple different ways how we could determine it. Step test, ramp test, 20-minute steady state. Yeah. And like the article said the other day, let me switch this. Like the article was talking about the other day was, by how much are we approximating it by? So ramp test multiplied by 72% of that is 78. Yeah, that's the best. And that's where we kind of came up with a blend of what we do at the Endurance Lab. We'll do the ramp. Essentially exhaust your anaerobic stores. And any aerobic contribution, anaerobic contribution to the second part of the test. So when done properly, that second 20-minute test, because of how quickly or slowly those systems regenerate, with the recovery being less than 5 minutes, you'll get a purely aerobic effort on the other side of it. One more. Yeah. So stacking that next to a ramp test, which essentially exhausts all the high-end VO2 stores. Then you get a VO2. The VLA is separate, remember? VLA comes from a 10 to 20 second sprint from a dead stop. So that's a little different. But you can get at least an approximation of the differences of the systems that contribute to most. So for example, if we did a test that was just the ramp, the approximation is higher because there's part of it that uses the other systems, right? The anaerobic systems. Yeah. All right. All right, we got 4 sprints. Down, pull up the jams, get some music going. Yep. So what you want to do is make the second half just aerobic, right? And not anaerobic. The threshold being defined is when you switch over to being anaerobic, right? Or your FTP. The point at which above you're anaerobic and below you're aerobic. All right, here we go. Times 4. Get it right here. Push it too much. Nice and steady. Come on. Oh. So what this is looking to do is deplete the very, very high end of anaerobic stores. Come on. And having little gap doesn't allow it to replenish. Likening to a 1 minute all-out effort. One more. Come on. Come on. Ah! Oh. Oh no, 5! I missed one. It's 5. Missed the count. Oops. Last week is 4. Now we're 5. Oh man. Ah. 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 Alright. Now let's go. Hey Brian. Morning to you, man. Alright. Next up we've got VO2. This could be, I could go max, but I'll blow up. Minimal effective dose These targets are quite high. Either way you approach it, you'll get to it. All right, let's jump this in for VO2.
So, talking about VO2
All
max.
right.
What is VO2 max? Why is it important to you? Why should you even care about it? So let's start with looking at the term VO2 max and what this actually means and where it actually comes from. You can divide the term into 3 snippets, which is the V with the dot, the O2, and the max. The V with the dot is simply a flux rate. So it is volume over time. O2 obviously means oxygen, and max for maximum. So it is the maximum oxygen uptake. So let's have a look how VO2 max is actually composed. Well, it starts with the oxygen, so the air that you inhale. So it has something to do maybe with your lung capacity. At least that's something you may find in a textbook. And then it's about the cardiovascular system transporting the oxygen via the blood to your working tissue, which is a muscle. Okay? And ultimately, this is where the oxygen is used. Okay? The oxygen is used in the muscle for energy, or better saying, maybe for power production. Okay? Now, what is important to note is that in most people, the first 2 parts here, how much air you can take in and how much you deliver to your muscles, is not the limiting factor.
Yeah.
In fact, the blood that goes back from the muscle to the lungs contains a significant amount of oxygen, and only a small fraction is actually taken out by the muscle, even under hard exercise. So the bottleneck is the combustion in the muscle, actually. Okay, so as an endurance athlete, this maybe is interesting to you, maybe it's not. You may ask, okay, why should I care? Like, how does this affect my performance? Well, pretty straightforward. If you want to produce 1 watt of power output on the bike, it requires a certain amount of oxygen, and that's pretty much fixed between one athlete and another. It doesn't really change. It is approximately 12 milliliters per minute to produce 1 watt of power on the bike. So to get this straight, if you want to go 100 watts, this requires 1.2 liters. 200 watts, 2.4. 300 watts, 3.6, and so on and so forth. Of course, in some scenarios, maybe you can replace a little bit of the oxygen demand by actually anaerobic metabolism. But this substitute is not really of interest for you as an Ironman athlete or triathlete. So, long story short, you want to produce power aerobically, you need oxygen for it. And it's a pretty fixed relationship. So, higher power requires more oxygen. This is why you care. Same thing goes for the running. It requires approximately 3.5 milliliter per kg, so per kilogram body weight, to run 1 kilometer power of speed. Obviously, it differs. If you have a better running economy, it's down to 3. Don't have really good running economy, it goes up to like 4 milliliters. And if you want to bring it back to miles per hour, it's somewhere in the range 5.7, so 5 to 6.5, depending on your running economy. So, long story short, your performance in endurance training and endurance triathlon, in triathlon competitions is highly determined because it's an aerobic sport. How good is your aerobic system?
Aerobic sport.
So what are the...
All right, we'll take a quick break. Got 5 here. Get us going. 0. Good recovery. Heart rate looks recovered. We'll go 5. So back to all out or not, we can. It's self-limiting. So what happens is, if you're not as dialed in and knowing what your maximum efforts are and the length, we'll do it this time. Watch. I won't end up much. Even if I do 7, I'll end up below 6. But for efforts that are 20 seconds or less, 30 seconds or less, the next 3 are going to be really challenging. Even though the first one felt really easy. All right, here we go. 4 more. Get the music on. There we go. Come on. Up, up, up. Oh man. Toasty. Getting toasty. Not much. Drop. Not much left. Two more. Oh no! Hey, turn that up. Oh. Almost. One more. One more. All up. Right, there you go. Not much of a sense. So you can see how short sprints, even at 30 seconds, can be self-limiting. All right. Back to Sebastian Weber. Oops. There we go. VO2.
Common ranges
Part
for
two.
VO2 max. What is high, what is low? Is your aerobic system.
Here we go.
So what are the common ranges for VO2 max? What is high, what is low? Well, untrained persons go at a range about 30 to 35 milliliters per kg. It decreases a little bit with age normally.
Yep.
Females have a little bit lower VO2 max as well.
That's 35 to 30.
Somewhere in this ballpark. Amateur athletes, recreational athletes, big range. Somewhere lower 40s to higher 60s up into the 70s. Depending again on age, again males a little bit higher than females. And for pro athletes, 75 plus. Ironman athletes, actually you can win Hawaii with a VO2 max somewhere in the ballpark of 75. When you look at professional cycling or cross-country skiing, other sports, 80 and above. One of the most common misunderstandings is that some people make the error to think VO2 max is not trainable. It's totally determined by genetics and why should I care because it's fixed anyway. But first off, it's a little bit strange to think that any metric in your body is not subject to change, at least by age, right? Everything in your body basically adapts, and VO2 max is no exception, right? So in fact, VO2 max is one of the best trainable metrics, maybe the most adaptable metric in your portfolio of metrics for your endurance performance. It will react to good training, it will decrease with too hard training and overreaching, and it will do so actually very, very quickly. You can see adaptations within weeks. However, what is genetically determined,
Hey, James.
at least to
Rice
a
cakes?
significant amount, and maybe this is where the misunderstanding or misperception comes from,
White rice?
is how quickly
Coconut
it
oil,
adapts. So when
peanut
you
butter,
start training or when you change
honey.
your training, how quickly can you see change? And how high can it go? So not everybody can go to 75, right? There seems to be a genetic ceiling on the maximum you can reach. However,
something
if you
new
train longer,
called
long enough, maybe you
Multistreaming.
can push it
Pretty
further
interesting.
boundary. And the third thing
Similar
that
to
seems to be genetically
my
determined by good amount.
Similar
is
to, so for fueling today, I started out with 30 grams of something called cluster dextrin. Similar to maltodextrin, breaks down to glucose, but doesn't empty the stomach as quickly. Maltodextrin does leave pretty quickly compared to higher starches. So 30 grams will last a good amount of the workout. So typically it's been a really good start for me, especially when you want metered amount of carbohydrate intake. It is the basis of what Scratch Labs has on their new fueling formula. But cluster dextrin, the main component, has been around for a long time. If you've heard of UCAN Superstarch, real similar to that, kind of real slow burn stuff. This is more along the lines of maltodextrin with less GI distress, so that's really helpful. We can chat more about it. I've got a slow burn after this. But yeah, let's finish this. This VO2 is just about wrapped up.
How much do you have to train to change it, right? And what training actually you have to do to change it. This vastly differs as well. Thanks for watching and see you.
We'll load this up. We'll get it ready. And then we'll play it on the next one. We got 55 seconds to the third interval. Here we go. Ooh. Just joined in on Facebook. Welcome. We're doing 15-second sprints, 15-second rest. As we found out last time, all out can leave us a little winded. So, minimal effective dose is what we like to go for. Hey, what's up, Jerry? That's awesome. Yeah, minimal effective dose is what we like to go for here. That's what we'll be doing today. So let's go. Let's go. Right at it. No ERG for this, for most of my workouts. But this one's really short. Come on. Oh. Get up. These short efforts, what's going to push that VO2 up and the VLA, unfortunately, together. But all good things. Number 3. Definitely fatiguing. Number 4. Everything got. Ah. Uno más. Uno más. Ah. Oh. Hey there. Hey there, Katie. Oh. Man. All good. Sabaloo. Oh. All right. Let's jump back over. See what Sebastian Weber has to say about VLA Max.
Hey, and welcome to today's episode about VLA Max, also known as maximum glycolytic power. So first have a look at the term again, and where does the term actually come from and what does it stand for? It's very similar to VO2 max, as you might notice. It consists of a V with a dot, which is again a flux rate, and the term LA, which stands for lactate, and then obviously maximum. So Why is the maximum flux rate of lactate glycolytic power? Well, pretty straightforward. In your glycolytic, or a little bit more roughly anaerobic metabolism, every time you want to produce power, you want to produce energy, you're breaking down glucose and you produce lactate. And the rate of lactate formation is absolutely proportional to the rate of energy production. If you have seen our last video about VO2 max, you will see very similar thing. VO2 max, the rate of oxygen uptake, is proportional to the power output or running speed, depending on your running economy. So this is what VLMX is. Okay, so why should you care? Why, as a triathlete, or potentially Ironman triathlete, or half Ironman triathlete, why should you care about glycolytic power? Like, your event is aerobic mostly, right? So why care? Well, you just said that you produce power in the anaerobic metabolism.
So watch this, Jerry. So later, Andy. So like for you and Mills and a lot of writers, the goals of weight loss, etc., decreasing the amount of carbohydrates that you take in during an effort and your exercise overall will push this number down this way to the left. And you consume less carbohydrates per hour, meaning decreasing your ability to recruit your glycolytic systems or sugar burning systems. And so in order to get those up, you need to retrain those high-end muscles, be fueled once you hit your goals to bring that VLA max number back up. So it'll make sense. I got 2 minutes, but...
And it produces lactate. And the source of that is glucose, so carbohydrate.
Let me go back.
Your event is aerobic mostly, right? So why care? Well, you just said that you produce power in the anaerobic metabolism and it produces lactate. And the source of that is glucose, so carbohydrates. So what VLMX actually determines is how much glucose, so how much carbohydrate you are actually using. So a low VLMX value, this is kind of the lower range. Professional marathon runners, very gifted endurance athletes,
Endurance-based,
Ironman,
yeah.
and so on and so forth.
You
0.2
maybe not that low.
milliliters per second.
Still low.
Highly trained sprinters, track sprinters, high anaerobic athletes, approximately 1.0, maybe a little bit
Edelson,
higher. In that ballpark, okay? And
Wagner,
when your,
Stoker.
so to speak, glycolytic system is not very well developed, so it's not producing a lot of lactate, it's not producing a lot of anaerobic power, then you're not using many carbohydrates, which is obviously what you want for Ironman training and triathlon training and racing.
Aerobic races, right?
However, when the system is highly developed, so the ability of your muscle to produce glycolytic power, producing lactate and using carbohydrates for that is highly developed, then also in the race you will use a lot of carbohydrates. So therefore, what you should aim for as a triathlete is reduction of your VLMX.
Take a quick break, then we'll talk about road cyclists. Get the music going. Here we go. 5 left. 4, 3, 2. Get it done. Talk a little bit why I do these in this part of the season in just a little bit. Phew. Timo! Thanks for the ride on. Thanks for the like, buddy. Three. Yeah. Come on. Oh, wrong gear. I don't want. Wow. So, one of the reasons why I'm doing these specifically, I'm not doing a huge amount of efforts on the bike. I'm actually lifting quite a bit. Good morning, Sam. 15-second sprints today. What we're trying to stimulate is that full dump of all the anaerobic and the CP, creatine phosphate systems, everything that's responsible on the high end of things in order to push VO2 up through the roof. So along with lifting the weights, I'm in week 7, ending week 7 of lifting. I'm in a strength phase for 2 weeks, lifting low reps, high weights at or above my 1 rep max to really push and recruit those muscles, opening up those pathways, and then we'll cycle back to get those muscles to work for us. Right now, we're converting everything to fast twitch, fast, explosive powers, and then we'll back off and take all that new muscle and bring it back and drag it to push our VLA max down. And going back to Katie's comment earlier, from what I hear, I know you are working with a coach, but dig in, ask questions. There's been a lot of new research, specifically from one of our riders here, what we're showing here, which is the balance between your glycolytic VLA max and your VO2. These are the two determining factors that will push or pull your FTP up or down. So even with the lower FTP, you can blast and be really high. This also speaks to the kind of tests that we do, whether they be ramp 20 minutes or 60 minutes. So that is also important. Each test sort of gives you an idea of where your strengths are if we look at raw numbers. So make sure you take that into account depending on the test. Absolutely, Tarvelli. I'm on the group me chat. You could actually message me direct from the daily grind. Click on my name, and we're there. That's where the endurance lab lives. That's where the endurance lab lives. Nice job, Sam. Good to hear you're recovering, man. Good to hear you're recovering. Don't forget, 95% of that 20 minutes is your new threshold. So you've got some headroom there, but it does sound like you're coming back, so that's great to hear. All right, what do we got? Hey, Dan, thanks for the ride on. Let's jump back finish up this conversation with Sebastian Weber here. I'll rewind it just a bit. So he's talking about contribution of carbohydrates at different efforts, and depending on your ability to use carbohydrates as a fuel source. If you do a lot of fasted training, you're going to be on the low end, obviously. More carbo fueled, you're going to be high. So what are a lot of Zwift riders, weekend warriors, time crunch athletes? It's right here. Really interesting. We'll rewind it back and bring it through.
As a triathlete is reduction of your VLA max. In professional Ironman races, you can win the Ironman with a slightly lower VO2 max, no problem, but you cannot afford to have a high VLA max. Why? Because you're burning too much carbohydrates, and when it comes to the run, you're running out of fuel and you're not going to make it. So now the question might come up, how do I know my VLA max? Because it's so important for my triathlon performance, how do I know if it's more on the lower end, like it should be, or more on the higher end? How do I know if it offers room for improvement, if I should train lowering my VLA max or changing my VLA max to improve my performance? And the answer is the only thing you can do is testing.
Yeah.
Testing is the only way to get an accurate
Trends,
VLA max.
of course, but testing would be the most accurate, of course.
You cannot read valid data out of your hydration curve or heart rate or training data. That is impossible. There is a validated protocol, a validated method to test it. It goes back to the year 2002. It even used muscle biopsies to look into the muscle to compare the VLA max calculated or measured with the actual glycolytic energy production and carbohydrate turnover and glucose turnover in the muscle itself. This is how it has been validated. And so if you want to get the real number, you actually need to test. Can be power only testing, can be with lactate and the lab, and the field doesn't really matter, but make sure it's a dedicated testing session with a validated protocol. And then you will have a very accurate number, and you will know how much room for improvement there is to spare carbohydrate and improve your fat combustion, therefore improve your power output in the race, and make sure you have enough energy left for the run.
There we go. There we go. All right, workout 1 done for the day. Let's load up my next. So if you notice, this is it, right? Balance, yeah. So here we were talking about all out efforts. Do you go to the goal or not? These first 2 were all out, and then fade. These were all measured and calculated. A little bit high in the first, which is expected in the first interval. Steady decline, but still, you're gonna want to see these kind of trends. And of course, heart rate increasing, maxing out at 173, 177 for the last one. So solid work. We're gonna head to slow burn, low cadence. It's Thursday, right? No, is it Friday? What is it? It's Friday. Yeah. Let me load this bad boy up. Slow burn. Actually, we'll do go down without sprints. Couple workouts. There it is, 75. There we go. 335. Let's drop this down. It's about 220 on the high end here. You have a lot of them. Yeah, a couple. That's back in the days where we had to program each of them into here, distribute them to each rider. It was nuts. It was nuts. Oh man, what happened? Yeah, wait, hold on. Go. There you go. DSP. Backing up. I like it. All right. Later, Jerry. I'll see you in a minute. I'll still be here. We got another hour or so, maybe longer. But we're gonna get down to slow burn. We'll pull up a couple videos. We can chat some more here in the chat. Some really good. Where are they? I'm gonna have to pull it up. This one was good. Low cadence. And how can I make you faster? And NCYD. I'll bring it down to low cadence here in just a minute. Oh, Tervali's still on. We were chatting about. Oh man, whew. That's a lot of food. Lucy Hall's inside data. Ooh, that's cool. I want to see that. Yeah, let's jump in here. All right. So this is intelligent triathlon training. All right. So this is interesting. We're gonna get some real interesting curves. Yeah, talk to your coach or we can chat about your base and building that muscular endurance and get you some positive experiences. I think you paired up with the right group, real positive group of people, get you where you want to be, and of course have a really good time doing it. So hope you keep leaning on us, and there's some good people around you. I know a lot of them personally, so I really hope you find a good group within the people that we're surrounding ourselves with. So, all right, let's jump in. Lucy Hall, you're going to want to see this. This one is good. Jerry, you'll have to rewind. Yeah.
Mark here, Intelligent Triathlon Training. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Lucy Hall, London 2012 Olympian and now 70.3 triathlete, and her recent visit here to do the inside physiological testing. So we're going to have a look through some of the data that she produced. We're going to have a look at how we can use that in her training, how it will help to form up some of the key sessions that she'll do this winter, transform her from a short distance, standard distance racer into a much more efficient and much more powerful biker for 70.3 riding. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of that data now. Okay, so here we go. I'm not going to go through all of the data that we have on there and comment upon everything. This is just pulling out the key things that we found from Lucy's test and how we can use those and what we're going to do about improving them or controlling them. So on this page, we've got 5 key variables, 5 key factors, 5 key elements, if you like, to somebody's profile. So we've got the VO2 max, which sets the upper ceiling of performance. And for Lucy's case, this population, this data on here is compared to a population norm. So for her, in her case, pro women, if you were an age group male, for instance, the way in which the scale would work. So you might compare yourself with a pro male and age group male. For an age group male, 60 mils per kilo might be high. For a pro male, it would be medium low. So the scaling on here is relevant to the population that she competes with. So VO2 max 67 mils per kilo, that's it's pretty good. So we would look to normally see ranges of something between 60 and 75 as being the absolute sort of upper limit for an endurance woman and pro level. We've got VLA max, which is the maximum lactate building rate, and has a lot to do with the sort of glycolytic or anaerobic capacity of someone, of a particular athlete. And although these things, the scale says top level or very low on here, the scaling is very much dependent upon the event that you want to do. So if you want to be an Ironman triathlete, doing long distance, or you're an ultra cyclist or something like that, you want to be very low. That's desirable. If you're a sprinter, or if you're a criterium racer, or a team relay athlete, for instance, triathlon, then you might want this VLA max to be much closer to what they classify as top level or a bit higher. And the normal sort of ranges that we're seeing is 0.2 through to about 1.1 in terms of
0.2 to 1.1.
Anyway.
Wow.
So 0.62 for a standard distance, Olympic distance drafting style triathlete then is pretty normal. So they need a bit of capacity to be able to push above threshold, holding high power outputs for short periods of time while they do turns on the front, accelerating out of corners, crossing gaps if they've not made the swim. So this is a fairly normal sort of figure for that type of athlete. However, Lucy wants to move into 70.3 and non-drafting, which is much more controlled. There's a lot less surging going on. We don't want the reliance on glycolytic power and the sort of the anaerobic capacity to be able to create power output. We want the aerobic system to be far more dominant. Here we have anaerobic threshold, so we've got 4.3 watts per kilo, 278 watts, and 80% VO2 max. That's all pretty normal, to be fair. It correlates well with what we've seen her be able to produce in standard distance triathlons when she's had to make a breakaway or have been in a small group. Sort of seeing figures somewhere between 260 and 270 watts, and you're not really going to maintain 100% of threshold for the whole hour, especially not in a triathlon. So that's sort of comparable with that. And here we have fat max. So fat max there's a couple of different things within fat max. So first of all, we have the power that fat max occurs at, which is 183 watts. And then we have the rate that you're able to burn fat at the highest level. So we want to use as much in an endurance sport. We want to use fat as a fuel as much as possible, because there's essentially, even in the leanest athletes, there's essentially an unlimited amount of fat available. And if we can use fat as our fuel source, then we can spare the limited amount of carbohydrate that we're able to either store or take in. And this, on the scale, is medium to low, and it is true. I mean, we would be, with an athlete with an FTP or a threshold of around 278 watts, I'd be wanting to see fat max somewhere much closer to well over 200 watts, and that's certainly something that we'll be working on. So here we have carb max, which is 3.2 watts per kilo. Carb max is the rate, is the power output that you burn 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour at. And the reason they choose 90 is because that's the upper limit of human absorption of carbohydrate. Yep. And 3.2 watts per kilo is relatively low. We would want to see that again moving towards the higher end. So let's have a little bit of a look at some other graphs. And I want to particularly focus on this fat max and carbohydrate combustion or consumption, utilization. Basically, it's the rate that you use carbohydrates or fat, if it's fat combustion, to provide energy to propel you forwards. So zooming in on this particular graph here, then we can see, so green line, which is your fat, or her fat utilization. As we can see, as power output goes up, fat utilization goes up to meet the extra energy under the higher watts. We hit an apex or a fat max area where that is the highest rate, and it occurs around that 182 watts. And then after that, fats are starting to produce, provide less and less of the energy in creating the power output or delivering the power output, and the orange carbohydrate line is starting to increase dramatically the amount of contribution it's putting in. At the point when they cross over, we've sort of gone to 50-50. Now we're producing, as you can see from the bottom's figures here, then we're producing 50% of Lucy's energy via fats and 50% by the combustion of carbohydrates. As the exercise intensity continues on, fats drop away completely, carbohydrates go up. By the time we hit second threshold, FTP or anaerobic threshold, we are burning exclusively carbohydrates at a fairly significant rate, 240 grams an hour. The green line here is basically the range of fat max. So as you can see from the curve here, there's not a lot of change between that. So there's a bit of a range. The orange shaded area signifies the sort of normal consumption of carbohydrates, so 60 to 90 grams an hour. And that carb max figure would correspond to this point here, where carbohydrate combustion has gone over 90 grams per hour, and we have a power output 208 watts. Ideally, we would like that to be a lot further over to the right, as would we like this point here to be a little bit further over here. And so obviously we can now set training to be able to do that properly. With this information, we can also work out how much carbohydrate Lucy needs to take on during the course of a triathlon. With Bahrain 70.3 coming up in a couple of weeks, we know the sort of target power outputs that we're aiming for. It's a fairly flat course, so it's fairly straightforward in that sense. And if we look at sort of target powers, then we're looking at around 120 to 130 grams of carbs an hour. If she's combusting 140 grams and consuming, i.e. ingesting, taking in via gels or drinks, 70 grams, we've got a deficit of 70 grams per hour. Now on a 2.5 hour bike, you can do the maths and work out that we've sort of depleted quite a lot of the carbohydrate stores there.
We were, Nathan, what did I say? Oh, we chatted earlier to answer your question. Your question was, why do we do ramp test and then 20-minute over? You can go back in the first hour of this workout. We chatted a little bit about it. Specifically, what we're looking to do is there's two systems generalizing. We're looking at an aerobic and an anaerobic system that contribute to our FTP, that functional threshold. And so what we're looking at to do in those two tests is to see what our strengths are. And by doing the ramp test, because of the effort being so short, essentially 15 to 20 minutes, when done correctly, you should deplete all of your anaerobic stores and efforts at the end of the ramp. With a short recovery, 3 to 5 minutes, what that should result in is a 20-minute interval that we do after that to be a completely aerobic or minimally anaerobic contribution, giving us an idea of what a pure 20-minute anaerobic effort looks like. And at that point, when done correctly, will give us an approximation of hours that are done on the other side of the threshold. And so you'll end up with essentially two numbers, kind of from a 100-foot view of VO2 type strength and more threshold. Obviously, digging deeper, we could look into some of the testing that we're looking at here, which will give us very specific numbers on your strengths, your weaknesses, and how to gain those. But from a big picture view, we could find out a rider's strengths and weaknesses by looking at their performances and trying to tweak it from there. And then when a rider's ready, we could bump them up to digging deeper. I am way over goals. But yeah, but tune in. We're talking some really cool stuff here. I'll switch it back.
So bearing in mind there is still a run to come, and she will have also consumed or combusted some carbohydrate during the course of the swim.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
She'll have combusted
I'm sure best. I would say do it.
Used it.
That weekend before we start week one.
That
weekend of Christmas, after Christmas.
The minimum
because you are like,
consuming,
you're on the ragged edge right now.
End of the race with
so just leave it
available
until like the 26th or 27th.
When
that weekend before we start base
during the summer,
in week one.
soon after
That's what I'd recommend.
We started working together again. Then we could see, partly due to fitness because she'd come off of an injury, but also partly because she was just getting used to this completely new fueling strategy. That she wasn't able to take on as much carbohydrate as she needed to, and she was paying a huge cost for that in the second half of the run, as everything just went flat and she reverted back to fat stores.
Let yourself
being able to provide
kind of
energy,
recover
and consequently
from the lifting.
Pace comes down again.
And
so knowing
it'll
what
take time,
we need to
3 to 5 days.
it's an absolute no-brainer. So that
we'll do like rest on Christmas Day.
Completely on
Saturday, do the pre-activation.
That strategy. And
Sunday, we'll do the ramp. I can put it in there for you.
That on a day.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for her training? Well, if we come back to the first table over here, so these points here we were saying, this for me is the most significant point. In order to be able to have a higher aerobic threshold, either VO2 max or VLA max needs to
So
change.
Just a quick summary here. Got the VO2 up here at the top. Oh, let me switch over screens. Go to intermission too. So up here at the top, let's see, did I get my thing? It didn't. Hey, Stefano. Thanks for the right on. Oh yeah, it's there. Okay, so here at the top, you've got the VO2 in the top left. This is your VO2 max number. This anaerobic threshold is your FTP. This VLA max is your glycolytic or carbohydrate consumption. And then fat max is over here. And then the carbohydrates and wattage is on this end. So we do have partners that we can work with if you're looking to get this testing in the future. So definitely let you know. But it's a really interesting look at a professional triathlete and kind of their numbers, and then what we can learn about them.
Now, generally, when VLA max comes down and VO2 max stays either stable or increases, then FTP anaerobic threshold will increase. If we were to increase this value and take this up to 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, we would see a drop-off in anaerobic threshold because the anaerobic component is providing more and more energy to meet the demands of those higher power outputs. And ultimately, that's going to lead to fatigue sooner or later. So in steady state athletes, such as 70.3 and Ironman, we want to see lower VLA maxes. And ideally, I would be looking to try and get this down somewhere near around 0.4. And the good news is it's very trainable. You just need to do the right kind of training. The training that she's been doing for Olympic distance drafting racing has been fine. So she's got a decent VO2 max, threshold's good, and VLA max is fine.
It's for a lot of you riders. This is what you'd want for drafting.
To more longer distance triathlon, more steady state, she will find a positive effect from reducing this down, having a positive effect upon her FTP.
Right.
Now,
So So that's really good information there. So what he's saying is that if you have a high VO2, you're very good at VO2, you've got a high-end, essentially sprint power. This is the Kettleson Stoker's even unate on this end. By decreasing your sprint ability, giving up some of that glycolytic power, change gears here. Oh, that should be good. You will get an increase in your anaerobic threshold or FTP. This is why riders who do a lot of sprint training, this number goes up this way, and it actually pushes the FTP down. Okay, so we do VO2 work, you do sprint work, everyone gets fast at 45 minutes race on Zwift, but the FTP doesn't change, or it goes down. Okay, so what we need to do is shuttle people off up this high-end sprint training, lengthen up the intervals, like your VO2 overdrive, and longer intervals like that, 8-2-3s, to be able to push this down towards this way, to the left, and decrease the utilization of carbohydrates during these to push up the FTP another way, right? Really important to understand there.
Good news about this is the type of training that we want to do this is also conducive to improving this. And just because this is here, we could see a much better fat max here from an athlete. We don't just, these aren't necessarily linked. The good news for us is that the training for this will also help this. So that's good. And that's what the next 3 or 4 months are going to look like for Lucy once we get past Bahrain, is performing training sessions that predominantly work towards reducing VLA max. How do we do that? Well, to do that, we need to train in specific intensities. And it's quite important that you get those right. Training in the wrong zones will lead to the wrong adaptations. So it is important. If we look at sort of base training, if we wanted to improve VO2 max, we'd be spending a lot of time in this lower zone 2, doing many hours over a period of time, and we'd be working at sort of the higher maximum aerobic powers here. Now, we want to improve VLA max, and so what we want to avoid is exactly that on the first part. We want to avoid too much time in these very low intensities. We need to be using the glycolytic pathway a little bit more, so we need to be depleting carbohydrate stores, and we need to have a contribution from the anaerobic capacity, but we don't want it to be switching on everything at a super rate, so it's absolutely flying away. What we want to be able to do is train in this sort of higher end zone here, so reasonably solid but not really long rides. So for somebody like Lucy, we're looking at 3-4 hour rides, holding up a level 2 and avoiding, like the plague, anything in zone 1 or long periods of time in zone 1 and lower zone 2. The other thing that we could introduce into there is things like overgear work, where we're switching on fast twitch fibers by reducing the cadence down to 55-60 RPM, switching on the fast twitch fibers, which will use glycogen as their fuel source, burn them out, and reduce that, and then start to train the body to use those fat stores as being more effective in terms of providing the energy for it. Other things that we'll be doing would be longer time trial type efforts in the medio zone, or some people might call it sweet spot tempo. That's sort of 80 to high 80% of FTP. With inside, we get much more specific information on what that is. The other thing that we need to factor in a little bit is some of the information we've got over here. So for each of these intensities, we've got an average carbohydrate and fat utilization on there. So if she is spending a lot of time in this mid to high level 2, zone 2 base training,
tempo,
then she can still expect to be burning 64 grams of carbs
64
an
grams
hour,
of carb
or
per hour
let's play
at tempo.
ballpark here, let's
60
say
grams.
50 to 70 grams of carbs per hour.
Yeah, 50 to
so
70.
She can't do these off of water.
Yeah.
Or she could do 1 or 2
Tempo
of them off water, but then fatigue will set in a lot
60 grams
earlier.
per hour.
So what we want to be doing is making sure that whilst we're not providing 70 or 80 grams of carbs an hour, we are providing
90.
some to enable her to be able to do the training and also improve on her recovery. So we need to be replacing probably about half of that per hour in order to be able to maintain that session. Not everybody's profile will be the same. Everybody's profile will be different, certainly in certain characteristics. And your training needs to reflect those different characteristics. We had an example recently. We had a couple of guys come in for testing, and it was quite curious because they were a perfect example, really, of how 2 people with the same FTP can have completely different profiles above and below that. They just happened to cross over at around 280 watts in their case. Both
90,
were 75 kilos, more or less. Both had FTPs with 280 watts. But one with a very, very low VLA max and one with a pretty high VLA max, and all the associated other areas that go with that. So giving those 2 guys the same program would probably benefit one of them if the program was any good, but the other one would fail miserably on it. And that's what we see a lot of time with coaching programs and training programs, which are set from generic guidelines, i.e. percentage of FTPs, or you do this type of training at this type of the season. That isn't true. So in Lucy's case, we're doing a specific type of training because we want a specific adaptation. Now is the right time to do that. When it comes around to the summertime, we'll be doing some more training, having retested, hopefully improve that VLA max so that we've got a better result there. But there'll be other areas that we want to target. And then we start to build in the race-specific training and the race-specific nutrition practice, because that's an integral part of developing the plan as well. So the whole periodization things can be evolved through the data that comes out of these tests. And that's what's really exciting, is being able to get the data and repeatedly test and modify training programs. Sure, I'm going to have a big picture plan. I think I know where we're going. But if the test data throws up something we're not expecting, or she doesn't adapt in the way we're expecting, then we're able to modify that and evolve with it, rather than just keep plugging away doing the wrong things. Hopefully you found that useful and interesting. And if you've got any questions, then please put them in the comment section below and we can get back to you. And if there's anything you'd like to see, any other content around this sort of area, then please let us know. Hey, Mark from Intelligent Triathlon Training, how you going? Today I wanted to go through some of the intricacies of inside and the software and the reports that we generate from that physiological assessment. Just to give you a bit of an insight into the level of information they get back, and a few quick comments on what we can do with it once we've got it. So let's dive right in now and have a little bit of a look. So in this video, we're going to cover a few of the tabs, some of the information you get back. Just going to highlight what we're going to cover, and then we'll give you in the links below how you can. I feel like this is closer to you, Jerry. To the relevant points if you're only interested in a certain graph or high VO2. So first of all, we have metabolic capacities and VO2 max, VLA max, anaerobic threshold, your fat max, and carbohydrate max, and we should be going through what they are. Then we'll move on to having a look at load characteristics. This is basically describing, all of these describe how your test goes on, how things progress through your physiological profile. We'll explain a little bit about what they are and how you can use them. Your fingerprint, metabolic fingerprint, is the snapshot. We'll talk about it's a highlight graph. So,
quick overview. VLA max is essentially your body's ability to use carbohydrate as a fuel. Essentially, it translates to kind of your sprint power to create high torque, high power at a quick speed. So think sprinting ability. So as you move up to the right hand side of the graph, you'll find riders that are more fast twitch sprinters. And the opposite side of the graph, you'll find are more slow twitch, towards aerobic, long rides, long races, that sort of thing. So for us, somewhere in the middle, for a lot of the riders from Endurance Lab, that's what you're looking at. So I'll bring it back just a bit.
Logical profile. We'll explain a little bit about what they are and how you can use them. Your fingerprint, metabolic fingerprint, is the snapshot. It's a highlight graph of what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you can then see how that progresses over time once you have a retest.
That's right, Jerry.
and it gives you a quick
But
indication.
it's gone better, I'm
Performance
hoping.
development, well, I haven't got
Over
much
4
performance
weeks.
development yet because I've only done one test, but in future there would be other data on there. And then finally we'll have a look at training zones and how they relate, how they might differ from some other training zones that you may have seen. So this is one of the first panels that we have, and on here you can see information about the athlete, me,
Mark Pierce.
the sport that the test was conducted in, who the coach is. I coached myself, funnily enough. The type of test that we did, in this case we were using blood lactates, DEST8, and we get a couple of the key variables that come out of it. So we've got VO2 max expressed in mils per kilo per minute, and a VLA max figure, and my weight. Underneath here, the first of these tabs here, so we won't go into body composition because we didn't measure any body composition, we just looked at body weight. Here we have metabolic capacities. And with these we've got VO2 max, VLA max, aerobic threshold, or anaerobic threshold, or FTP, critical power. Yeah, I know, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, they're not strictly speaking the same thing, but in the sort of real world, most people are using them fairly interchangeably. The academics will get a little bit upset, I'm sure. Then we have fat max over here on the right hand side, and in there we've got a couple of figures on some of these. So we've got the relative, obviously expressed relative to body weight, and then we've got the absolute, and then we've got the carb max. And what I want to do is just explain a couple of quick points on what these are. A couple of caveats. So there are 3 settings on this software. You're either classified as a pro, an amateur, or recreational. I've classified myself as recreational because I don't race. I haven't raced in 15 years, and I don't train specifically. I'm not. I just ride my bike and enjoy myself. So that I've classified myself as recreational. When I did one and I classified myself as amateur, then the relative position of these figures changed. So instead of being top level VO2 max, it put me down somewhere in the medium. Oh. So here we have VO2 max, so relatively speaking, 60.2 mils per kilo, and an absolute of nearly 5.3 litres per minute, or 5,200 millilitres, which as a recreational athlete puts you at a fairly high level. The VLA max, now we'll come on to more what VLA max is in the next graph, but mine sits at 0.51. Now on here, the very low to top level will depend very much upon what your objectives are. Now if an Ironman athlete had a VLA max in the top level, I'd be slightly concerned about the training that they're doing, because that's showing they've got a high anaerobic capacity. Similarly, if you had a cyclocross or a crit racer or something like that, or a sprint distance or a team relay athlete with a very low VLA max, then I'd also be very worried about that, because they need that anaerobic capacity, that really high intensity work to be able to perform at a top level. Then we have the AT, anaerobic threshold, FTP, etc., relative to body weight and absolute. So here you can see mine's come out 3.7 watts, 320 watts. Sorry, I can't speak today. 328 watts absolute, which occurs at 77.6 of my VO2 max, and that is important because this can be, the way it appears relative to VO2 max can be influenced by things like your VLA max. So in an ideal world, you want that around sort of 80% more or less. So I'm not far off, but as an all-round athlete, around
all-arounder,
80%.
definitely
Again,
all-arounder.
Crit racer, somebody with a high VLA max might be a little bit lower, and an Ironman athlete or ultra endurance, or somebody who does a lot of sportifs,
And above on the top right.
Grand Fondos would be probably maybe a little bit over 80. You'll be looking for a little bit over 80. Fat max. So there's a few different ways you can express fat max. So here we have relative to body weight, so at 5.58 kilocalories per hour per minute, per kilo, sorry, and it occurs at 215 watts. Again, we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in the next graph, or next set of graphs. 490 calories, and this is the top end where I can perform at using
90 grams an hour.
The upper limits of human absorption of carbohydrates. So if I supplement during a long ride, for instance, you can absorb around a maximum of about 90 grams of carbs per hour. And for me, that power output occurs at 2.6 watts per kilo. Again, that'll make more sense in a minute. So let's move right on to that then, shall we? So this top left one here, we're looking at simple VO2 max. So it's uptake, so what I actually consumed, or what it calculated I actually consumed, and what the demand was. Now, as you can see, as the line starts to separate here, the pale blue line being the actual uptake and the dark blue line being the demand, then I'm unable to supply all of the oxygen required to meet the power output on the x-axis by aerobic metabolism. I'm starting to have to use my anaerobic or glycolytic engine to be able to produce that.
There's that switch over
and
power,
somebody with a
essentially where
higher
the ramp test
capacity
comes
than
from.
mine would, there'd be a bigger
Until it's
differential by the
exhausted.
time we get to the end tip here. For somebody with a lower capacity, then it would be a shallower line or a shallower gap between the two lines. On the bottom left-hand side, we have lactate production and maximum oxidation rates, and concentration. So with the, let's start with the yellow one. So this is, it's not quite the same as curve. Have you ever done a step test and they take a blood lactate at the end of each stage? It's similar but not quite the same. So what this is representing is what would happen to the blood lactate if you maintained that intensity, power output, running speed for a long period of time. Because ultimately, because you're in a state where the lactate that's being produced is being cleared quite quickly, the actual value is quite low. Much lower than you'd actually see in a one-off reading at the end of a 4 or 6 minute stage. But you can see, so my FTP came out 328 watts, so we can see around that sort of figure. After that point, you get a rapid increase in blood lactate, much more again than you would do on a step test. It's not the same graph, just to clarify that. So the red one is the production line. That's how much lactate is being produced at each stage or at each power output. And then the blue line is the maximum rate at which you can burn the lactate that's been produced. If you want to find out more about what lactate is, and not about all the myths and things that lactate is an evil thing,
that was
and it's
a big
the acid and it's
breakthrough
what
this
makes
year.
legs hurt. It isn't. Lactate is produced as a part of carbohydrate metabolism. Hydrogen ions are what causes the pain, the discomfort of when you go over threshold, and therefore causes fatigue and stops you from exercising any further. If you want to find out more about that, then we're going to have a little bit more in-depth physiology. This is really just about explaining some of the graphs and how you can use them. Okay. So top right hand side on here we have two lines. We have a grey line which is below my threshold, and then a purple line which is above. So the grey line is what they term as lack of pyruvate, and it's heavily related to basically the way in which you can clear the lactate from the muscles, and where we see this apex here sort of hovering around the 200 mark up to sort of 225, the highest rate there. So in this example, I can clear at 220 watts, the highest rate I can clear lactate from my blood is at around that 210 watt mark, and it's at 0.55 millimoles per minute per litre of blood. When we go over threshold, it starts to accumulate, and you can't get rid of it anymore. You're gradually going to be accumulating it. And this line here relates to the gap between this blue line and the red line here. So just over threshold, there's not a lot. As you get further and further and further away, obviously the gap goes up, and this is what we see here. So from this we can calculate. So if I was to ride at 400 watts, for instance, then every minute I rode at 400 watts, I would be accumulating 1.37 millimoles per litre per minute. Let's have a quick look at the blue graph over here, the blue line over here. My peak lactate concentrations that I can sort of sustain or reach are around 8 millimole. So in theory, we can work out from this graph, if I'm going to accumulate 37 millimole at,
this is where like the 2 to 1, watts, 3 to 1,
it's relatively easy
4
to
to 1 ratio on
400 watts for.
recovery
so
versus
this can
watts.
be used in helping
the
you
shuttle
to
comes.
understand the consequence of going over threshold.
Yeah.
So if you're
go over threshold, you've got to recover.
You've got to climb in the course. How far over threshold can you ride, and for how long, before it starts to become a big problem?
Exactly.
Now, if I sit at just over threshold, so let's say 340 watts, I'm only accumulating at 0.16 millimoles per minute, which means I should be able to sustain that for a quite a long period of time. Now, it's not going to be easy, don't get me wrong, there are other things that will start to affect that, one of which being the bottom right graph, which is how much carbohydrate I'm using at that particular moment. But in theory, that's how long you'd be able to go for. If we then want to calculate, for instance, some VO2 max efforts for you, people's lines are going to be different. So the way in which this purple curve it exhibits itself and the values that come with that are going to be very unique to each individual. So from that, you can start to set, or we can, if we're doing it for you, we can start to set intervals which are much more specific to your abilities, to your characteristics, and relative to the discipline and the events that you want to improve in. The bottom right graph, particularly useful for the longer endurance events when carbohydrate availability is a limitation. So from here we can see, so a couple of lines look fairly familiar. So the orange line here is basically your carbohydrate oxidation rate, or how much carbohydrate you're using at any given power output. And the green line is your fat utilization. As we can see, at fairly low intensities, in my case, 50, 60, 70 watts, we're virtually burning nothing because there's no energy need for it. It's such a low intensity. Once we come up to around 200 watts, we start to get that peak rate of fat oxidation. So if we look at the line here on the crosshairs,
60 to 65%.
So they're burning sort of 484 calories a minute, an hour, sorry, and
close to
that sort of holds a really flat portion of the graph through there, all the way up to about 230 odd watts, 33 watts, 34 watts. And that's my fat max. So fat max would be the highest one of those. So what the software's come up with is the absolute apex of that there, and that creates my fat max. The green shaded line is the band that you would be operating in. So what is fat max? In a nutshell, fat max is the highest rate you can burn fats as your primary fuel source or as a fuel source. And the intensity or the power output, the work rate that goes with that is the work rate that point occurs at.
Super important is the fueling too.
Ride, for instance, an Ironman, fat max is the zone you're going to spend most of your time in.
Exactly.
You might pop out of it a little bit for a hill or a downhill, but ultimately you're going to be spending most of your time in that zone. And again, this can be very different. So you can have two people with the same FTP, but their fat maxes will be in very different places. And that will then obviously affect that Ironman or endurance rider's performance, especially if we moved a little bit above. So at that point there, at the top end of my fat max, I'm still burning a lot of fat, but I'm also starting to burn quite a lot of carbohydrate. So here I'm up to 102 grams, and I know I am a bit of a sugar muncher, so I know if I don't take on plenty of carbs during exercise, then I'm going to blow my doors off.
You got to get carbohydrates in for these efforts, even at tempo.
This just puts some more specific numbers to it.
So
if we come all the way up to
90
threshold,
grams.
you see the green line's descended down to the apex, to the baseline, and it's 0, which is what happens at threshold. At threshold, the whole point there is you are now burning 100% carbohydrate.
100%
now, if I was to
carbohydrate.
ride at threshold for an hour and do, let's say, for argument's sake, a 25-mile time trial, I'm going to burn 284 grams of carbohydrate. Now, the maximum rate of human absorption is around 90 grams. Some studies suggest up to 100 grams, but
thanks for jumping in, man.
Anybody who's tried it knows the practicalities of trying to get 90 grams of carbs in an hour is pretty hard work.
It's challenging.
At 90 grams an hour, I've got a fairly significant deficit. Now, fortunately, your muscles and blood glucose and things like that provide some stores. You have stores on board already to start with. But if I came back a little bit and tried to ride midway between my fat max and my threshold, which is more like 70.3 pace, or sort of 2.5 to 3 hours, then you're looking at around, I'm looking at around 150 grams of carbs per hour. If I'm popping 90 back in again, I've got a deficit of something like 60 grams an hour, which is going to, by the time I've done a run and a swim on the front of that, I'm going to be getting pretty close to being empty. So that will help me to judge the efforts, how hard I can go, and how much fuel I need to get in to be able to do that, and obviously where my training needs to go. If I was looking at this and if I was trying to advise myself where my training needs to improve, I need to improve this. The fat max is my biggest limitation at the moment, and the amount of carbohydrates I consume pretty much all the way through is my biggest limitation for a longer distance endurance race. If we keep moving swiftly along, come along, so we've got a little fingerprint now. Good. So it's just a snapshot of where category that you're putting yourself in, or we're putting you in, then this is the limitations. Again, if I went to pro, this would not be at the top of the range. This would be somewhere in the bottom of the range. But I'm not racing pros, so that doesn't matter. So my VO2 max, relatively speaking, is pretty high. My VLA max is pretty low. And that is what we talked about earlier as being one of the key things. That's basically the measure of your anaerobic capacity. This is one of the big surprises for me, because I thought mine was going to be a bit higher than that, because I know as a rider I've got quite a good punch above my threshold. However, I also thought my threshold was lower than it actually is, so that'll probably explain why I thought I had a better punch, because I was
that's a really good point. Yeah, he mentioned that he did two fat maxes back to back. So what it speaks to is we've been working on something very, let me bring this back, very different with Bimo, with what he likes to do, which is longer rides, right? So for him, what we've been doing is working a lot of that 80 to 82% of maximum heart rate really pushing up his efficiency and decreasing the cadence, allowing him to build muscular endurance to be able to do efforts like that, 40, 60 minutes at fat max, which took him through that 200-mile ride. Yeah. And so, again, for riders like, you know, in the category that we're building, I gotta drop my power down, hold on. Like yourself, Stoker, Kettleson, which are great on the high end, the anaerobic side, you guys could definitely use a lot of work just like that. Low cadence, fat max, fueled, and I think it could really put down a really good aerobic pace for you guys to be able to have a really great season. And then we circle back and do the high end. And oppositely for Jerry, he's got that base, kind of like how Themo has built over the last year, where he's got to do the opposite. So, I mean, those are the personalizations that I think are super useful. So, but yeah, absolutely.
Being 20 watts lower than it actually came out at. So I had to revise my expectations a little bit. You've got anaerobic threshold in terms of power relative to body weight and in absolute numbers. Now, because I'm relatively heavy, my absolute figure is not as good as my relative. My relative figure is not as good as my absolute. And therefore, if I lose a few kilos,
right, Jerry?
and manage to maintain
that speaks
my
really
threshold,
good
my absolute threshold,
your
328
simple
watts,
60-second,
then
30-second anaerobic sprints
towards the outside, simply because I've lost weight, and therefore my relative
you had a lot of room.
power output is better.
That's awesome, Jerry.
Body fat's
So
moderate,
you're getting it.
but
It's coming
again,
together.
that's just a standard figure that's been put in there if you didn't enter anything specifically.
And we could even
for
mix
it.
it up even more for
And
those
my
sprints
fat max in terms of absolute
to get that
power
BLA max
output
even higher.
is sort of moderate.
And
therefore, you can
relative
see
number
from
up.
these then where my strengths and weaknesses lie. But also, particularly with the VLA max, knowing that I don't necessarily want it to be super high. That's not necessarily a good thing, although it can be. If we've got repeat tests and multiple tests, then we would obviously see on here how the key metrics have tracked and changed over time. And then we've got training zones. Now, these are, it looks like there's quite a lot of training zones on there. Don't worry about below 9.
There's
that
a lot.
gives any coach who wanted to use more zones or different zones, they can enter those things in there. And this is a slightly different way to looking at zone systems or power zones than some of the systems that maybe people may be familiar with. So, for instance, they're not necessarily all sequential. So the zones are describing a type of training or a level of.
That's interesting. 10-second and 30-second sprints come from the recruitment of fast twitch muscles, right? So again, it starts for those track sprinters, those people with backgrounds in, you know, like Nate has, you know, powerlifting backgrounds, that muscle and that explosiveness. And so it's training those fast twitch muscles to be able to work or recruiting them. And so that's where you want to be able to quickly recruit those and have that explosive power. Good thing is that over a short period of time, you can get to your physiological, you know, maximum within anywhere from 3 to 6 workouts, sprint-wise. How do you improve that? Essentially, you go back and make more muscle, right? So I'm 7 weeks in with 1 rep max increase from the last 2 years, hopefully increasing muscle and size and ability to use that muscle to be able to recruit and then push those numbers up. Considering where you're coming from, Jerry, it's a great place to be, right? Because we're pushing the other way, right? You came from your goals being decreasing weight, you know, body composition, that coming down. And that's going to come with weight, fat, muscle, everything, right? And then now we're at the point, once we reach that goal, then we can turn that on and try to build that very specific muscle back. So you can't do 2 things like we talk about in the coach's corner all the time about you can't do more than one thing at a time. You can't be getting your better body composition and increasing your sprints or increasing your fitness. It's one or the other. You've got to work on one or the other. So, all right, let's get back into zones. These are super important, but good wrap. I'm about 30 minutes left here, so yeah, let's roll.
Of intensity. So, for instance, the first two are obviously sequential. So we've got recovery zone, 120 to 170 watts, or base training, so my long endurance mileage, somewhere between 170 and 219. And then all of a sudden we've got nothing. So 219 to 239, there's 20 watts that don't exist there. They are what people might call the grey zone or junk. It's solid, it's hard, but it's not that hard. And it's just wasting your time basically. And here we have medium zone, and that is quite a large range. And that's going to roughly correspond to something between tempo and sweet spot training, if you're familiar with those terms. So it's quite a large zone, but that's the sort of that high-end aerobic work, long distance reps where you're doing 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes, up to sort of 2 hours of riding at that sort of intensity. It's also where any sort of 70.3 or Ironman intensity is going to come in. Then we've got go back down again, so we've gone down to 195 to 237. So this is if I wanted to work on fat max. This is the key areas that I'd want to be in. If I wanted to go longer, if I was doing a long session, 3, 4, 5 hours maybe, then I'd obviously want to be towards the lower end of this range. If I was doing a shorter, I've only got an hour to spend, but this is the area I want to be training in, I can work up to that sort of 237 mark.
Look how many carbs.
We've got the anaerobic FTP
threshold. He'll go over it.
So
81
anywhere in this sort of range here, depending upon the type of intervals or the type of reps that you're working on. So you can influence. So with that, this is sort of 90%, just over 90% FTP, with an FTP anaerobic threshold of 328. So. And obviously that's just over it. So again, quite a broad zone because different types of intervals will require different intensities, but that's the area you'd be working in.
So it's exactly to what we see in your performance, right?
Roughly what you can hold for somewhere
lots of
between
carbohydrates,
3 and 5 minutes, really, and that's sort of an indication.
Really high power
that's working around that
you can torque up type power and create. Yeah.
And then above that, we've got high-end anaerobic power work as well, so which would be shorter than that, down to sort of maybe a minute's worth of intervals on and off. And again, depending upon how you do them, would depend upon what those figures would be within that session. And then, so another slightly broader zone, the lactate shuttling zone, which again is used more specifically for sub-interval training. Now, in these first few zones, we also get the average, so looking at the target figure here, this is the calorie consumption. So if you were training, if I were training at 200 watts, then I'd be consuming something like 769 kilocalories per hour, of which 63% is going to be fat, 37% is going to be carbohydrate, which means I'm burning 68 grams of carbs an hour. So if I'm on a 4-hour steady ride, and it's relatively flat, or I'm very good at holding a fairly constant power and not doing massive surges on every climb, then I can probably assume that I'm going to burn around 68 grams of carbs. I don't need to replace all of that because hopefully through my diet I actually have somewhere between 400 and 500 grams on board already. Yeah. But I might need to keep that topped up because I am a bit of a sugar burner. Some people's figures here would be much, much lower for the same relative intensity. Because I am a sugar burner, then I need to keep a little bit going in. Now, that comes on to what you can do in terms of training. Now, of course, one of the things I might want to do from this, if I wanted to develop my Ironman bike performance, would be working on my fat burning abilities. And we can set programs which challenge that a lot more. You can look at your diet and your nutrition. Obviously, you can see from this, so if we go up to the fat max zone, so although it's my fat max zone and I'm burning fats at the highest rate, I'm also burning quite a lot of sugar and carbohydrate at the moment as well. Exactly. So I need to be cautious of that in my training programs.
Right.
So I hope that's all been useful for you and answered a few questions. If you have more questions, then please get in touch. Check out our website, ITT.
There we go. Yeah, well, hopefully that was helpful. Yeah, so super interesting stuff. I've been digging deep into this for 9 months, 9, 10, 11 months since quarantine, working with Coach Mike from TeamODZ and out of Canada. We're working out of a university there. But definitely been learning a lot. So it's been interesting. All right, let's find some fun stuff to watch. Let's see. Oh, this is good. Can I start a queue? Oh, yeah, add to queue. Alright, let's see. There's gotta be a couple other ones. Why did my legs and power fail so fast yesterday? Yeah. So, what we're trying to do is both your weightlifting that you're doing and the VO2 work that you're doing are working on the same system, right? Working on depleting the same system. So if there wasn't enough rest, which is by design, not enough rest between the lifting and the effort where you're trying to recruit so many of those anaerobic muscles, then it's not gonna happen. Yeah. So I'll be throwing in some of those starting next Wednesday for the next 3 weeks. So I'll talk us through it, but essentially we're burning 2 parts of that to increase essentially all the VO2 and strength in this little interim of 4 weeks that we've had in December. Yep. Yeah. And that'll do it, right? Because you're gonna get, because when we do weightlifting, even though it seems like your heart rate's not up, each of our lifts are anaerobic, short, explosive, strong efforts, right? So you got to think of all of these as on the upper side of the curve, right? That allows us to work on that end. So take it within a grain, super important, and just understand that that's where it's coming from. So, but I think overall you're doing great. It's tough. It's not easy. It's not easy. So, oh, these are awesome. Oh, that's cool right there too. Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, Jerry. We're like a couple weeks out. I've been going back and forth on kind of what we should do for you. I'm thinking polarized training, you know, low cadence, tempo, fat max, and then twice a week, you know, short VO2 efforts, you know, 5 minutes or less. Can shuttle in low cadence, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, but really need to kind of polarize that training so that you can do full out VO2 efforts to pull those sides up. Because really what we want to do is we want to bring the VLA max number to the right. So it's a lot of sprints and fast switch stuff, right? So it's kind of putting that together. Or the thing is, we've done a lot of that right now, which is the dilemma. And so I feel like we're burning the fire hot. So can we return for 4 weeks, do some base, and then cycle back for some build, and then go back to the 1 minute stuff? I'm feeling like that could be strong as the last chat that we had. All right, here's some fun stuff. Yeah, it would burn out quick, right? All right, this is fun. Let's see. This is funny. Let me turn this down. How different people react when you pass them on a bike.
On your left. 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 On your left.
Yeah, that's my son right there. That's my son.
On your left.
You need to say that sooner. You almost hit me.
On your left. On your left. On your left. On your left.
Oh,
Don't say it.
Falcon.
Don't you say it.
On your left.
Come on.
The different ways people cross the road. Stare. The no looker.
You need to slow down. You almost hit me.
Little kid. Oh man. Texter. Indecisive.
I found Jigglypuff.
Go ahead. I'll just go. Oh, go ahead. No, you can go. You can go.
Oh, the ridge line. Is there audio for this? Oh, there's not. Oh!
Okay.
Hey, Frank. Thanks for the like. Thanks for following, man. I appreciate it. Oh, you gotta check this video. It's awesome. This one looks good.
Drops away into this steep hole, and then the left side is quite mellow gradient. Like the view's amazing down to the left there.
Oh, you know this one, Tarvali? Katie, you seen this? I just saw.
Yeah,
Oh,
bring
cool.
everything up, and then we can just chill up here, and then if it drops off enough to ride, we can test the first few.
Wow. Beautiful. Look at that.
The ridge is basically an idea that we came up with over the summer about trying to tackle this enormous peak that's behind the bike park. You know, it's this unscalable ridge that just runs straight down. The plan was to build this line down the edge of it that was just step downs in a straight line, you know, absolutely pinned, huge gaps, just as gnarly as we could make it, and it's one of the toughest things I've ever seen.
Oh, beautiful. Wow. Yeah, they are. Oh. Wow. Nuts. I'll pull that up next, Sherry. Oh, ouch! The drone!
As soon as you land, you've got to take off again. You know, the next gap is on you within a split second. And they're all monsters, you know, like huge 70-foot step downs. So the room for error is just absolutely zero.
Oh. Yeah, I saw that. $160,000 worth of bikes. That was nuts, Nate.
I just crumbled. Everything went down. And I just ragged all through it. But I'm all right, I think. That was a big crash. And I'm lucky I went right and not left.
Wow. Wow, look at that drone. It's amazing. Oh, he did it. He did it.
Oh my god! Massive!
That's awesome. Let's check out the beginning of Jerry's video here.
That was way better.
That's awesome. Oh. Oh, wow. Oh, what's going on? What is going on?
Oh, c'est de la glace vive! Oh, il y a des vélos, ils sont cassés et tout.
What? What?
Yeah, man!
Oh, what's happening? What in the world? What is this?
Salut les gars, c'est Damien pour Laps. On se retrouve, on est au sommet du glacier des Deux Alpes à 3600 mètres.
I
Donc là,
survived.
vous pouvez le voir, on est au départ de la plus grosse mass start du monde. Regardez l'étendue des bikes, il y en a partout tout autour de nous. Et nous, on a fait une mauvaise qualif avec Maxime.
Wow.
De crevaison et de cassage de roue. On est tout là-bas au fond. Et l'objectif, c'est de remonter tout là-bas devant. Ça va être du sport. Allez, à toutes.
Ça toi aussi. Allez. Oui.
No. Wow. That's nuts. I gotta check out the beginning of this.
Oh merde, c'est parti. On était pas prêts.
Here we go. Here we go. Oh, he's like on the outside. There you go. Oh, what is that beeping? Ouch. There we go. Oh my gosh, it's so loud. Look at all those people. Where? Oh, nice. Yeah, Andy has a KOM across a lake, frozen lake. Oh, oh. Oh wow. People using their feet, their bikes. Oh geez. Yeah, this guy too. Oh man.
Oh là, c'est de la glace, c'est chaud. Et on est à fond. On va se calmer un peu.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh, person.
Voilà, il y a eu un sale accident, les gars.
Oh, look at that accident. Person. Oh, jeez. Thread it. Thread him. Thread it. Nice. Nice. Broken bike.
Oh, il y a des vélos, ils sont cassés.
Oh, wow. Oh, broken bikes. Oh, you still have to pedal. Here it is. Oh, he ran. Oh, crazy.
À pied, ça ira plus vite.
What? And then downhill again. It's that icy or that hard packed? Yeah, it's a hard hit. Wow. Oh, wait, wait. Oh, the guy's facing. Oh, jump. Oh, dirt. Wow.
Ah bah voilà.
Oh.
Il en fallait bien une. Ça reprend.
repart, ça repart.
Oh, that's deep. Oh, it's like... All right, later, Jerry. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for adding that. Yeah, I'm just about done. I'm 3 minutes to go. No, Kev, I do not. I do not. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. That is crazy. Oh. All right. So we will wrap this up here. Thanks for everybody joining in. This is a long one. It's 2 hours today. Very rare chance I get a chance to work out all the middle of the day. But yeah, Andy, Jerry, Kev, Nate, Katie, thanks for joining in. Who else came through today? Yeah, actually, Sam came through. Themo, thanks for joining. And thanks for all the ride-ons. Nick, James Solis, Goldie, always good to see everybody here today. All right. But yeah, send me a message, Katie. We'll get to chatting. Like I said, just want to make sure your experience with us is a positive one. We all need that. And I'll catch everybody on the next live stream. In the meantime, check us out at TeamODZ.com, EnduranceLab.fit. Don't forget to click subscribe and share with your friends. We'll see you on the next live stream.